Welcome to the Monday Club from the Irish News. On this week's show, we're taking a look at Armagh. Do they have what it takes to get back to the top? And can things get any worse for Davy Fitzgerald and Antrim after Sunday's collapse in Cahair? I'm Neil Loughran, and this week I am joined by Andy Waters and Cahair O'Kane. Andy, before we get to your native county, you were in Budapest last week, just revisiting. You were there, of course, in November, like with the famous night in November, we'll call it. The Troy Parade. What was it like? Was it a bit weird walking back around it and seeing all those memories flooding back?
Yeah, well, it was definitely a bit quieter, yeah, and but lovely city full of history and culture, and
you didn't
some nice pubs.
You didn't try and break into the ground and recreate it or anything like that.
Is there a statue or anything
of Troy, St. Troy the Parrot? Not yet, no, but why not?
Only a matter of time.
Yeah. See, they've started disallowing goals he scored for nothing now.
I saw that.
See that at the weekend?
He's just scoring too.
Well, they have a 6-3 bar in Budapest in memory of when they beat England 6-3 at Wembley. So they could have a 3-2 bar. But
bound to be an Irish.
Do you remember that team, Andy?
I remember it well, aye. Yeah. I could have been on it only for...
there has to be.
Only for not being Hungarian.
Yeah, there has to be one with a decent name, like something along an Irish bar. I always remember in Prague there was a bar, like a kind of halfway house between Cuban and Irish bar called O'Chea's.
Oh, yeah.
So they'll have to think of something. Anyway, we digress.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay, so Armagh, Andy, we're going to take a wee look at where things are headed that way. Started the league, convincing win over a below par Monaghan in the first game you were there. Didn't work out against Galway. Very close game again, as it always tends to be. What's the feeling within Armagh about where they are? I suppose there was the disappointment of last year. Not it's not a bad place to be if your year is kind of gauged against not winning the All-Ireland. They're not holding on to the All-Ireland, but where are Armagh as we look into 2026?
Well, I suppose going down to Roscommon on Sunday is going to tell a big tale for them. I think, as you said, they were far too strong for Monaghan, albeit a very weak Monaghan side or understrength Monaghan side. They had 7 debutants that day. Arma had a couple themselves, but the Galway game, I think they'll be absolutely kicking themselves they didn't win it, because at one stage they did look like, although it was a seesaw, terrific game of football, wasn't it? But they lost it right at the death, and you could see why Kieran McGeeney was so annoyed about it, because home games obviously are crucial in Division 1. They get 2 points on the board. They would be on 4. Then sort of takes the pressure off. Another win here or there, you're probably going to stay up, aren't you? But it was one that got away, and I do think that it could come back to haunt them, like as the whole thing develops, like.
As in they might struggle to stay up?
Well, we'll see. As I say, like going to Roscommon now on Sunday is going to tell a big tale. It's early days for them, but without a doubt, like, they have lost some serious players, like Rian O'Neill, who defensively in midfield, free kicks, playing up front, is just a massive player for them. Stephen Campbell as well, that creativity. Niall Grimley in midfield, and then the loss of that sort of physicality around midfield means Murnan's had to come back and play in midfield alongside Callum O'Neill, who's more of a creative sort of scoring player, so sort of robbing them of that sort of offensive strength as well, and then they've lost Kieran Higgins, Jamar Hall, who else? I'm not even.
I mean, you're talking about
Shane McPartland. There's a lot
Shane
of
Conor Mackin's away, even guys still coming back. Barry McCambridge, Roy Grugan, Aidan Forker, Ben Creeley, Kieran Mackin, Darren McMullen will come in the next couple of weeks. I suppose at this stage of the year, it's hard to look too much into those couple of games so far. But when you look at the Armagh in the round, even Cahair, like that, that's an awful lot of experience that they've lost out of their pull. Because they've just been the most consistent squad, definitely in Ulster, I would say, within the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, in terms of we talked a lot here about Derry and Tyrone last week and the depth that Tyrone would have, and their depth comes from the minors and under-20s in different places. Like the fact that Armagh's squad was, and particularly in their All-Ireland winning year, their 26 was so strong from 16 to 26 was a remarkable achievement, given that they didn't have those groundings of minors and 20s and people pushing up on the team from the kind of natural order that you would look at from other counties. There's still a fair wee bit of depth there at the minute, but we find that, so we take Gareth Murphy playing full back at the minute, and came in last year into the panel and never played any football, and there seems to be something about the way that Kieran McGeeney has run the Armagh setup and run the squad that players, for whatever reason, are more willing to run that apprenticeship and run that time in Armagh than maybe any other county. They're I'm not saying they're happy to come in and sit for 18 months and not play any football, but they're accepting of the fact that this might be the way. Because you've seen other counties struggle to develop the depth because their 16 to their 26 changes so often. It's and I mean changes as in players come and go out of the squad. Armagh have had, like, Tomas McCormick must be there 4 years.
Well, I'll just say Callum O'Neill, who I mentioned there, I'd say he's there maybe 7 years, something like that. In training squads and not getting really. Obviously he comes from a junior club or a club that were playing junior football. But 7 years working his way up to now getting his chance. Like
it's incredible that players would give themselves to that, if you like without regular football, and that is the strength and the rarity of Armagh and what they've done in the last few years. Like I've always maintained that their All Ireland 2024 was one of the best All Irelands ever won, in the sense of where they had come from, but also the tools that they were given to build it with. And I'm saying that in terms of a lack of school success, a lack of club success, lack of minors, lack of under-20s, lack of kind of anything.
It's 2015 since Cross last won the Ulster Club, and they haven't had a finalist even since. One intermediate, one Ulster, one Ulster intermediate title ever. Cullyhan obviously went on and won the All Ireland, but that was an outlier as much as anything, and as you said, then you look down at the under-20s minors, there's not a roll call. But then maybe does there need to be? That's what I think. It's an interesting topic because, as you mentioned, we talked about Tyrone and Derry last week, and you're kind of going year on year on year. They've got this, and people talk about the conveyor belt and stuff. But which squad are you looking at and going, well, I'd rather be them or not? I'd rather be Armagh, I'd rather be Tyrone. There's not very much necessarily between them. Like, so, like, or do we put too much stock in that kind of thing? Maybe.
Well, no, but I suppose players can sort of develop at their own pace. I mean, if you look at Down, if you're talking about club football, I mean, Tyrone club football is obviously like legendary. The strength of it and the competitiveness of it, and without a doubt, like, the quality's through the roof in Tyrone. Like, but if you look at Armagh football, the senior champions haven't really made a dent in Ulster for a while. Down have via Kilcoo. Obviously, won an All Ireland, won Ulster All Ireland. But apart from that, like, would you measure the Armagh champions v the Down champions? There couldn't be much. There wouldn't be much in it, would there?
No.
In terms of underage success, Tyrone have been so dominant, but we've yet to really see the fruits of all that labour come through at senior level.
I think you mentioned Down there, and like obviously Down have improved an awful lot under Conor Lavery, and it's something I would feel. The cult of personality there around a manager, like Donegal's fortunes completely transformed when Jim McGuinness came back. They went from being nowhere to all of a sudden being an All Ireland semi-final again, then an All Ireland final in year 2. Down have built around Conor Lavery and what he has brought, and like, ultimately a lot of the time it's about having the right manager and the right management team, and then giving them enough time to actually develop the players. Like, if Down do anything other than try to convince Conor Laverty to stay for the next 5 or 6 years, they're insane, no matter what way this year goes or next year goes. Because, like anything, it's like, well, and I'm not saying they would be thinking this way, but if they were thinking of, just maybe we need to change something. Who do you replace him with, and what are they going to do that's any better? And that was the thing. Kieran McGeeney was under a lot of pressure.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, because there are parallels there. Like down would have been a revolving door of guys getting every year. You know, there was this stories of so and so's away, so and so's away, so and so's away. Impossible to build any kind of continuity at all. And Armagh were the exact same. I remember those first 4 or 5 years of Kieran McGeeney when he was in, and anytime you went to a McKenna Cup match and it was the first time you got to talk to him in the year, and he'd kind of be reeling off this list of people who, you know, were not going to be available for the year ahead. And I don't know if that's just a consequence of, like, at the time they were playing in Division 3, you know, they were struggling to make any headway in Ulster, and then all of a sudden when you get a wee chink of light.
Well, actually, the year before he took over, Armagh got
To the
within a
quarterfinal,
whisker of
yeah.
a All-Ireland semi-final.
Yeah.
Donegal beat them by a point. So there was the foundations there. I mean, yes, the first 5 years of Geezer were disappointing, but I think it was the game against Mayo down in Castlebar where they pushed them so close, and obviously Mayo had themselves come so close to winning All-Ireland that really gave them the belief to kick on, and then didn't they bump into Kieran Donaghy that night in the hotel, and you know, he obviously slotted in, and he was that sort of maybe that missing piece of the backroom team, and you know, things really developed from there.
Mm.
The first side, they didn't win an Ulster Championship match in those first 4 or 5 years at all, and the one that stands out in my mind is losing to Fermanagh down in Brewster Park. And you're talking about the revolving door, and I think every manager, it probably takes a certain amount of time for them to not necessarily learn who the best players are, but who are the players who are going to commit to what they need them to commit to. Like, I know when Rory Gallagher came into Derry, he spent the first 18 months kind of sifting through to see who would stay, and then once that panel was built, that really didn't change then, and probably hasn't changed that much in the 4 or 5 years since. And Armagh went through that teething process early on, and they then went full circle in terms of they became the most consistent panel in the country, like up until this year. And there were, you know, a lot of players left over the winter: Jamar Hall, Kieran Hanlon, Stephen Campbell, all those boys who, and it felt like the first time in forever there was probably a wee bit of not an exodus as such, but like an overhaul of the squad. Whereas for a long time, Armagh's, like, they carry a bigger panel than probably most counties. Like, they carry upwards on 40, and you know, most are probably in around 34, 35, but it felt like those 40 never really altered all that much. There might have been one change or two, but when you're going down as far as number 36 or 37 or 38 in any county squad, you would almost expect those to change. Like, those are players who are sitting thinking, well, where am I going to play any football?
And
What
plus,
am I doing here?
you need to freshen it up as well. There is that end of it too. Yes, you want that consistency, but there's always got to be room for the next guy to.
And I felt actually probably, like, they went in, people forget too, they went into the All-Ireland quarter final last year against Kerry as probably slight favourites.
Oh, they were.
And Clifford not
well,
being
because Kerry
He's-
had been so flat.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were 5 points up in the second half. I mean, if you'd put a bet on that, you'd have been thinking, this is sweet. Like, well, you know, at one stage, you know, it did look as if it was going to script.
And
but
part of that was
that's the beauty of sport.
part of that was the freshness in terms of whether by accident or design there was players missing, but there was also selection calls, and like 3 of their best players last year were Charlie O'Burns, Ross McQuillan and Oisin O'Neill, and none of the 3 of them were in the team the previous year, the starting team. So they freshened it from within, and that's my point of Armagh's ability to freshen from within. They're not, right, oh God, you know, Rory Grugan's injured, we have to bring a fella in from club football now, and he's going to take 18 months to develop. They have done the 18 months in the background, and by the time they come into the team, they're so much closer to being ready to step into it than probably in most other counties. And that is the whole strength of the last 4 or 5 years for them, is the fact that when they're replacing players in and out of their team, they're replacing the fellas maybe haven't got a huge amount of on-field game time and experience, but they've been in the training squad and they've been in training games for maybe 2, 3, 4 years. By the time you're seeing Tomas McCormick on a team sheet, or you're seeing Gareth Murphy on a team sheet, you to us, they're brand new. But to the systems and everything that they've been doing, they're not new at all. And so that is what has been able to keep them, you know, because really and truly, like, there was a fair overhaul last year between the All Ireland final and the Kerry game. You know, there was a fair few changes to their team, and by and large, you take an All Ireland winning team, and you take half a dozen of them out the following year. By rights, they probably should be nowhere near it, and yet for 35 minutes. They were every bit as good as Kerry, and
Well,
then that 50
that's
minutes
one
spell
thing.
happened.
Yeah, wasn't it the game against Derry up at Celtic Park?
Yeah.
Murnin was injured and he had been so outstanding.
Yeah.
It was, you know, Stephen Campbell didn't start the game, or he was taken off, one or the other. But they didn't seem to miss him. That's for years. It's sort of what you're saying. Guys who you looked upon as crucial players, you know, were injured or suspended. You know, the operation didn't skip a beat. Like, you know, so we're sort of going back to your original question of having lost like half a dozen or 8 players, you know, can they really muster another All Ireland sort of challenge?
Yeah, and for me, one of the things, like, winning that All Ireland without Kieran McGeeney is something that is almost never talked about. You know, it wasn't mentioned round the final. It was like Kieran McGeeney was outstanding up until that point. He was playing serious football, did his cruciate. And you think, right, a team that hasn't won an All Ireland before, you lose a player of the calibre and the form that Kieran McGeeney is in, that's a catastrophic blow to your hopes. And yet, going in around that final, in the aftermath of that final, there was very little talk about how big a loss Kieran McGeeney actually was, which, you know, the squad, the internal, they obviously knew how good he was, but it showed you how kind of seamlessly they were able to replace him without him really being without it really being noticed that he wasn't there.
Yeah, he looked like he nailed on for an All-Star, wasn't he? He was brilliant. And then Tiernan Kelly came in, and who had been more of a forward sort of minded player, came in and just played brilliantly. Like,
I think there's that versatility as well, isn't there, with a lot of the Armagh players? And I wonder, like, we obviously were in here a few weeks ago talking in a fair bit of depth about Donegal and their All Ireland final defeat to Kerry and so forth. And I wonder what, like, the Armagh's exit last year, the Kerry game, and we were looking at what Donegal could take from that last year and what might change and so forth. What's the view of, you know, that because there was like a shock and awe kind of factor nearly with what happened to Armagh last year. It probably hasn't been picked over the same way the Donegal's defeat to Kerry has, because it was just like this mental 13 minutes 14 point, you know, run of scores. Like like, is there anything that needs to change, or what lessons do they take from that, do you feel, like, going into this year?
well, I think that if you were a manager or whatever, and that was happening to you, like, you know, you've got to have a plan B, like, which there didn't seem to be any evidence of one. Slow it down, start a fight, you know, just to do something different. But Armagh just seemed to get caught up in the moment, didn't they? Like, kicking it, you know, and expecting something to change. But it didn't. Like, you know, I thought the substitutions, some of them were strange in that game, or questionable, let's say.
Shippey was unavailable that day as well, which was,
Yeah.
you know, a big. Yeah.
But even to change things around in midfield, or whatever it was, maybe the options, you know, there were options that weren't used. But no, certainly there would be a bit of a going back to the drawing board about that, the way they were caught out there, and I'm sure they were disappointed about it.
I think a fair wee bit about football changed that weekend, not just round Armagh, but Donegal and Monaghan as well, because unlike most teams who were you looked at Galway, or you even looked at Dublin, you looked at Kerry, a lot of the time on kickouts they were going to overloads, putting a big wall of bodies on one side and kicking to it, and effectively saying we'll back ourselves to win the break here. Whereas Donegal and Armagh were both kind of out on their own in terms of spreading catchers across the field and trying to isolate players and find really precise ways out. And, like, what was it, was he Ethan Rafferty 22 out of 22 against Tyrone until a certain point, and then he lost one, like, and that was off the same system, and up until that point it seemed to be working really well. And then that weekend Armagh's kick out broke down and Donegal's kick out broke down against Monaghan in the first half, and it was like Donegal came out in the All-Ireland semi-final and went to an overload and played a lot of overload in the All-Ireland final as well. And I think everybody probably learned a wee bit from that weekend in terms of like how feasible is it actually to pick those precise kickouts with the press and the way it is now, and maybe you just have to be a wee bit safer. And so, like Ethan Rafferty came in for an awful lot of flack, and Armagh came in for flack for, as you say, not changing it and different things. But up until those 15 minutes, it had worked so well for them, and it was like it was like a bomb going off. You know, it was like, what the hell is happening here? Why can we not get out? And when you watch it back, like Kerry were just again so aggressive and so tuned in and so aware of where all the catchers were and getting bodies around it.
But they were all catching them. Mihal
Burns.
Dr. Crooks caught one. He wouldn't be, regarded as a, spectacular field of the ball. But, they were all, it just seemed a bit that sort of magic hour for Kerry. And I suppose you've got to give immense credit to, we spoke about Kerry and Donegal a couple of weeks ago. You've got to give immense credit to Jack O'Connor and his Dermot Murphy or Jason McGahan, for pinpointing the weaknesses and how they can look at other teams and combat their strengths. Don't you against Arma and obviously in the final against Donegal?
They definitely they did a number on the Armagh kick out in that 15 minutes, like they did, and I felt maybe it's the very poor goalkeeper in me, but I actually felt sorry for Ethan Rafferty because when the plan is not to go to an overload, and it's already talk about being adaptable. Like players, you'll have worked and worked and worked on this, and they'll have worked on it not just in the 2 weeks leading up to the Kerry game, but for 6 months before, and they were so good at it, and it just collapsed. And the goalkeeper is the one who ends up getting the brunt of that because ultimately, the ball's coming off his tee and his left foot. And it's like, but there was so much else that went wrong in that period in terms of, players just being too isolated. There was a couple decision making on the kick was middling, and then there was a lot of it was just Kerry's aggression around the ball in the air and the ball on the ground in those 15 minutes, and it just blew Armagh away to a point where the game was over once that spell ended. And like in the first half, Armagh had played a fair bit of the football and had hurt Kerry in different ways, and the goal was a bit of a, they robbed the short kick out and got a goal out of it to lead, but they were in a good position. And to be in a good position at that point is good to go back to everything they had kind of they had lost or changed from the year previous, showed you kind of the depth that they had built up. And it's just interesting now. It feels like they've lost more. And we're back to Sippy Campbell and Jamar Hall and Kieran McGeeney and all those boys. Like, there wasn't always a made 26s, those fellas. Like, a lot of the time they weren't in, or they were dipping in round. Campbell was always in the 26 when he was fit, but there was other boys who were in and out of 26s and fitness and injury. But what they'd have brought to Armagh's training games, the level that they'd have brought those games to, is where Armagh will probably miss them, because we talked about number 36 and 37 being they now probably are restarting that process again. They're starting with a new 34, 35, 36, 37 and having to build them players to a point where they're really competitive and adding the training games. And so that's where I see Armagh are probably a wee bit behind where they were even last year, because those players are no longer in Callanbridge, and training with them.
Yeah. But it's a good job they're not in Callanbridge, because I think Armagh have moved on to their new standard of excellence.
No, they're not on it yet. No, they're not on it yet. No, they're hoping to be on it for this. Hoping to be on it for the summer, but it's not ready yet.
Okay, well, that actually, as you were talking there, I was thinking of a column I wrote a couple of years ago, which is probably
I remember it well.
Most ill-timed
Great read.
and retrospectively kind of ridiculous column of all time, because it was just after they'd lost to Derry on penalties in the Ulster final 24, and I just always remember being, it taps into, I suppose, what we've been talking about here, which is the lack of natural kind of order of success that would lead to senior level, and why I couldn't really understand the expectation levels in Armagh, I guess, and that was the thrust of it. Why there was this the huge expectation with one All Ireland at that stage and so forth. Just Cahair obviously referred to some of the challenges that they face this year. Andy, are you confident with Armagh this year? What's the expectation in Armagh now?
Well, I'd say, you know, they get a bit of luck with injuries. You know, Grugan's fit and
Kieran Mackin and stuff comes back
Cambridge
in.
out.
Kieran Mackin, McCambridge, you know, Dar McMullen, you know, Ben Creeley, you know, a bit of luck with injuries. At full strength, they're still going to be a, you know, it's still going to be a formidable outfit. Is there an All Ireland in them? Probably at this stage of the season, I would say no, but they certainly should be looking at an Ulster Championship, like, which has eluded them for
The last couple.
well, how long? The last 5 years when they've been, you know,
2008.
at this sort of peak, like, so
And that was a lot of the talk actually leading into last year. Obviously, they had won the All Ireland, but so much of the talk was about like how determined, because of the disappointments that they have had to amongst the group, to win
yeah.
an Ulster. You know, and that's because that's where the real heartache has come for this Armagh group. You would say.
Well, I mean, if they couldn't really have come any closer, could they? I mean, they've had no luck, and that's. But I you know, I couldn't see an All Ireland, but a Ulster title, I think, an Anglo Celt.
And just to go back on that point, losing those Ulster finals, they lost the first one to Derry, that they probably should have won in extra time in the position they were up. I think they were 2 points up with whatever 4 or 5 minutes left in extra time.
Well, didn't we shouldn't just pin it on them, but Rory Grugan did have a chance, didn't he? From
That was then the
mark?
normal time, yeah.
Yeah, to
but-
win that game, and the ball sort of caught the wind and just dropped short.
But those last 2 or 3 minutes of extra time, they were 2 points up. And one of the things that had plagued them to that point was indiscipline and moments of indiscipline and giving away really soft, cheap frees. And they did that in those 4 or 5 minutes, and they let Derry into a game that they shouldn't have let them into, and then they lost it on penalties. And again, it's back to sort of winning that All Ireland. Like, I think it got overlooked. Armagh went through their entire All Ireland winning year in 24 without a single black card or a single red card, and their free count went down, and it was just like, so they actually zoned in and fixed the things
The discipline
that had held them back, because that was how close they were. You know, when they were close enough to be leading by 2 points with 3 minutes to go in extra time in an Ulster final, they should win that Ulster final, but they'd caused themselves not to. But then they fixed it, and their discipline in 24 was again a part of their game that probably didn't get enough credit. There was a moment just after Aaron Mackay's goal in the All Ireland final, and like the place was going mad. Croke Park's about to explode, and the noise is deafening. I can remember a ball inside the Armagh 13, and one of the Galway forwards goes to bend on it. I think it's Rory Grugan comes in. And in that chaos, the easy thing to do, or this, you know, is so easy to get wrapped up in that, make the tackle as he's bending, free in on the 13. You know, just that wee moment of getting caught up on it. And Grugan just, you know, let him bend, stay goal side, and shepherded him back out. And just in that one wee moment, you kind of saw how much they learned, and to keep their heads in that cauldron.
blue heads.
Absolutely, like so, you know, they fixed the thing. So it was remarkable in many ways, but it was also a kind of a testament to going after certain elements of their own flaws.
Well, yeah, and maybe you've got to go through. Maybe you can remember the big mass brawl against Galway, and Armagh kept getting sucked into these battles, like which obviously weren't.
I think even when you think back to that, the Cahair reference, the Fermanagh game in Brewster Park, I think Niall Grimley was sent off that night and stuff. You know,
stuff like that. Maybe you've got to go through that sort of process of sort of self-reflection, you know, and being able to stand
quite a long
back
time.
and discipline, etc. You know, till you get to that level, and you know what? Once all those little factors all add together, you know, you've got success. Like,
I just want to finish up this section then, I suppose, talking with a word about McGeeney, because obviously he's in his 12th year now, 13 if you count the year that he was there with Paul Grimley. Yeah, and he's only 54 still. You would expect that there's plenty more, you know, if he wants to stay, like, because he did come in for a lot of criticism in those early years, and he references, like, occasionally that, you know, he still must hear few doubts despite winning on All Ireland stuff. But is there a fear when somebody's been there for that long, and the impact that he has? Cahair says that the cult of the manager, like, for a potential drop off down the line, or what's like, or do you see him being there like for the foreseeable?
I can't see any reason why he would go. I can't say that it's imminent. Obviously, it's a results business, isn't it? I mean, if there's a drop off, the drop down through the leagues, they're not competitive in the championship, then maybe there will be a rethink. At the minute, obviously, like there's been those retirements that we spoke of, so he's rebuilding another team. So he'll be backed. I think as long as he wants the job, I think it's his.
Yeah, one of the key things he's done as well over the 10 years is he's kind of constantly refreshed his background team. He's constantly kept it fresh. He hasn't tried to impose the same thing for 10 or 11 or 12 years. Like he's effectively his third backroom team now in the same reign that he's on. So like that helps as well. He keeps on refreshing it, and I suppose
Are you surprised he didn't bring anybody in to replace Kieran Donaghy this time?
Aye, well, again, I suppose if you have to bring in, it's not just to say somebody bringing in for the sake of it, or just to fill a slot. You have to probably find somebody who brings the value that Donaghy brings, and Donaghy just brought so much personality to it. And he did a lot of work with the inside forwards and stuff. So they must have felt they could get along without him. How long he stays, again, there'll be no urge to get him out. He managed to quell that. Obviously, the winter before they won the All Ireland, there was a vote on him, which was felt like madness at the time. And I know, like the players would have had influence within their clubs in terms of, saying to the clubs, do not be getting rid of this man.
Mm-hmm.
The players want him to stay. So
even with that, it was very close.
It was, and that's it. And within the room, it was and like it was as if they'd learned nothing from the Kildare situation, where the players wanted him to stay, and the clubs in Kildare decided they knew better, and they got rid of him. And Kildare people would tell you like that was the biggest mistake they ever made.
But you just don't. I totally accept what you're saying, but you just don't give a guy a chance and another chance and another chance. I mean, but I think the thing about Geezer at that stage was there was no obvious replacement. Like there was no Joe Kiernan in the wings, and it sort of goes back to the lack of success at club level or even minor level. Under 20, there was no All Ireland winning on minor team.
Natural successor.
Yeah, exactly.
But it also feels
you go back to the two brands, for example, who were very close. Joe Kiernan was having such brilliant success with Crossmaglen. Yes, you've got a chance. So if you don't do it well, we're going to make a change here. This man's sort of banging at the door. There wasn't that character or that personality in Armagh football at the time. So there wasn't really a reason to take McGeeney out and put another person in. Plus, obviously, he'd done his.
It feels like, obviously it's a discussion, but for me it's not even a question at the minute.
Oh no!
As in like there's no question.
I suppose I'm only asking because
exactly
when he decides, if it's not going to
exactly. But for the short term, certainly for the next few seasons, I would imagine that it's entirely on him. If he wants to stay, he will stay. If he wants to go, he will go. But there's no question on the other side of it, So he's bought himself that time and he's earned that time, and it's the fact that, again, like I listened to Tommy Rooney and like Paddy Andrews felt that the winners of the All Ireland would come from the two games last weekend. Either Donegal Kerry or Galway Armagh would win the All Ireland this year, and while I don't necessarily see Armagh just because of the changes, and I don't necessarily see them as high as that, the fact that they are still being seen as, and like they lost the game to Galway, they played all the football against Galway. Armagh played all the football that night, and performance wise was so high. It's remarkable that everything that has changed, that their performance level is so high. So it would be madness to think anything other than the future, and it just entirely comes down to his own energy and whether whether they keep on being successful to a certain point. What is success for Armagh, as he routinely would have said, like they've had a couple of, the 1977 All-Ireland team, the 2002 All-Ireland winning team. Like Armagh's history is not full of great teams is very, very cyclical. So look, I'm sure they'd love to win an Ulster Championship for this group of players, and they're in that mix of teams. They're in that mix of teams that could win in All Ireland still if the things fell right and they got everybody injury free and they got a run. Like, they're definitely in that conversation for sure. But you talked about the expectation. What's the expectation level in Armagh? I think it's probably a wee bit too high in terms of just the turnover and the change that there's been over the winter and the players that they're missing at the minute. And I think it's testament to them in some ways that their performance levels are as high as they are.
Okay, so we're going to turn to the small ball and have a look at the two Ulster counties who are this year in Division 1B of the National Hurling League. The obvious starting place, Andy, is Antrim. You were in Kildare yesterday in Newbridge, and that's as momentous defeats go for Antrim. I would say that's up there in recent times. It really
down there.
Yeah, it was quite shocking. What was the feeling there? And obviously Davy didn't speak afterwards. You tried to get him, but he wasn't talking.
Just wasn't happening. No. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would qualify anything I say with I don't see Antrim play that much. What I suppose shocked me or surprised me, or what disappointed me was from the last time I'd seen them, they seemed to have actually declined, deteriorated. I couldn't see any evidence of improvement there, in terms of the game plan, their structure, fitness. They've got some skillful hurlers, there's no doubt about that, but in terms of like the physicality, required to play at that level, I didn't see it. There was, I said, like a lack of urgency sometimes to them, maybe a bit leggy, maybe they're training too hard. I know that Saoirse Dolphin was saying afterwards that was their third week in a row they were out, and Kildare had only played one league game up to that point. Newbridge is a tough place to go, but I must say, they were well beaten. After maybe 15 minutes, they were sort of a couple of points up. Once Kildare got the lead on them, really, like, there was only one team going to win it, and although it was only 10 points in the end, it did feel like more than that, because Kildare took their foot off the gas a bit, towards the end. So, no, I mean, no positives really to take from that going forward. And as you said, Davy Fitz didn't decline to come out and chat about it. It's obviously his prerogative, but no, the results just aren't coming, and they don't look like coming.
I suppose when you get a result like that, Cahair, like, there's obviously going to be a backlash and a lot of commentary around it, but so much of the focus with Antrim since the day and hour that he arrived has been on Davy Fitzgerald, for good, for bad. There was split opinions within the county when he did come, and now you can see that, and certainly in summer you see some former players and stuff. It's quite toxic, I suppose, in some ways. Some of the what's going around now. How do you see this panning out and how we got here?
How you see it panning out, it looks like it's only heading one direction. It's very difficult when you get, what are we, February? You're about 15 months in, 16 months in, and there's no obvious sign of any improvement. And at that point there, it starts to, for something to survive and to last, you can lose games, or you have bad results, or you can have, Antrim have lost plenty of Leinster Championship games down the years and different things. So, but there always has to be a sign of we're heading somewhere here. And at the minute, that result and performance on Sunday just kind of struck. It's like there's just such a lack of energy about the whole thing. There's just you mentioned positives there. Like, there's just such a lack of positive energy about Antrim at the minute. Like, and that goes back. I remember I was at the league game last year against Waterford in Corrigan Park, and the thing that really struck me was the flatness of the whole place, of the players, of the crowd, of Corrigan. And I think this was Corrigan that, teams had struggled to come to under Darren Gleeson, and they had made life
Drew
really
McClare
difficult. And Drew
and,
McClare
yeah.
beat Wexford in the championship up there, and they had an energy and an enthusiasm about them that just doesn't seem to exist in the minute. And there's probably a lot of factors playing into that. One of them being that Davy Fitz inherited a pool of players who do not have a particularly high age profile, but they've played an awful lot of hurling. They've been banging with probably most of the players come from clubs that are reaching the semi-final of the club championship every year, and so their club season is long, and they're straight back in on their county season now because of the nature of it. Everybody's county season is long. There's nobody All Ireland finals in July, but there's teams finished in April or May. That doesn't happen anymore. Everybody's playing till a certain point, so the years are long, and they just look tired. And then when there's not a kind of a freshness or a positivity and an energy around the camp, then that's feeding, that makes it very difficult to lift the energy, and it just feels they look like that. I just thought, and he's criticised for loads of things, but the sweeper system and the defensive system is one of the big things, and
that's something that Johnny McIntosh spoke about in the paper last week, and it's something that a lot of Antrim supporters have talked about in the last 18 months, is the fact that Antrim do have good forwards. They've really good forwards, but their scoring totals are low.
Well, you wouldn't have noticed it yesterday because they weren't in the game at all, and it was, are we playing a long ball game here? Are we going to run the ball? What's the one up front? Double marked yesterday, and they started pucking the ball into him. I just Conal Cunning wasn't in. Couldn't get into. James McNaughton was really,
who's an
a
exceptional
bystander.
player.
Yeah, I mean,
during Darren Gleeson's years in charge, James McNaughton went to
All-Star nominee in
completely
24
level.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that says talk about positive energy, to come out from day one and say we have to play a sweeper. And Davy Fitz is he has come out and said after games, well, if we don't play a sweeper, look at the goals we might concede. And that to me is the definition of a kind of a negative mindset. Yeah. It's like, we have to do this, and it's not seeing the fact that your scoring tallies are 16, 17 points. You have to score as well. It's like you're leaving your forwards a man short.
How are you developing a team?
Look at Kildare's second goal yesterday. It almost summed the thing up. Like, Donald Nugent cleared the ball, and he cleared it down, and it beat it at the end of the target and ran straight into the path of the Kildare sweeper, who was given to them by Antrim's sweeper. Kildare had a sweeper because Antrim dropped the man back. He come across, picked the ball up and drove it back in to what was somehow a 3v3 on the edge of the square, and the sweeper was 10, 12, 15 yards away and was caught and put in the top corner. And it was like, that absolutely has to be bulletproof if you're going to. You can't play that way and isolate. Like, Conal Cunning spent the day at full forward, running wing to wing and wing to wing, looking for ball. And the first ball he won. He actually won a free out of it, but he was 1 against 4 when he won it. And like, I'm no hurling expert, but there's a very basic, flaw there. When you're giving your opposition the extra bodies, then it has to be bulletproof at the other end. You can't concede 3 goals to Kildare, otherwise you're in serious trouble. And it just feels like, where does it lift itself from this point? How does it actually get back up? Because now it's 16 months in, it's showing no real sign of improvement. That's hard.
That was the thing for me that obviously stands out. The concerning thing is there's just a flat line here, if that, at best, and to change it up from here. Obviously, the bottom 2 go down, don't they?
Yep.
In Division 1 to Division 2, which will be, a serious blow.
It's a big
to their hopes.
And so there are things as well that, in fairness to Davy Fitz, that are beyond his control, in terms of, like, you look at the Antrim squad that's been for the past few years, and there's a lack of physical size. You look at, again, and go back to that game I was at, Waterford bullied them around Corrigan Park, just sheer physically massive in comparison.
I just Brian Dowling, the Kildare manager, was talking about Mick Gillick, their strength and conditioning coach. Antrim need to get him or somebody like him. And that's not to say to the coach. I'm sure he's doing a good job, but you could see there's a gulf there's a gulf there in terms of the condition, physicality between the teams.
But in fairness, like, and it's something that's been said to me a few times. Like, we Antrim, it's kind of a lack of natural size. A lot of their players are smaller height wise. Like they're full back. Like,
Dublin were their kryptonite even throughout the years.
and there's nothing you can do. No strength and conditioning coach can make somebody be 6'2".
Yeah.
You know, and so that is a difficulty that Davy Fitz can do nothing about. You know, that's every manager's going to have to deal with that. But within that, Darren Gleeson had the same problem and had them a lot more competitive and a lot more energetic and a lot more positive about themselves. So there's the two sides of it. There are definitely flaws there. Like, they haven't probably brought through enough over the last 5 or 6 years. You know, Joseph McLaughlin come in from Cushendall. They've a couple under 20s at the minute that look like they might come in the next year or two. But by and large, it's effectively the same pool of players, and it goes back to the fact that they've been playing for so long. You take Paddy Burke there at full back at 30 now, and you know, you'd love to be able to say to him, take a weekend off, take a couple of weeks, but there's no opportunity for that because he's needed every single week. And then when you play every single week for 10 or 11 years, you're mentally tired. And then when there's a lack of positivity around the thing, how do you get out of that? How does the group get out of that funk? Like, and that's the look. It's without question, if Davy Fitz can pull them out of it, it's the biggest challenge of his managerial career, without question. And if he needs to find a way to pull them out of what is just a pretty negative spiral.
Yeah, because like before this year started, you'd have been looking at the Joe McDonagh Cup and going, well, like Antrim are a level above everybody in that, and they should be winning that. Now you're looking at Carlow, Laois, Westmeath, Down, you know, and going, they'll all be looking at Antrim thinking, yeah, we'll give ourselves a chance there. And like, if they don't beat Carlow in a few weeks' time, then they're as good as relegated. I think, you know, that they're certainly right in the mix, you know, and so much of that.
Well, unless they beat Dublin. They're playing Dublin and Parnell Park.
Yeah,
I mean,
but they don't have a good record.
That's a horrendous record against
one thing, like Kildare beat them by 10 points. Kildare won last year's Doctor or McDonagh Cup. So you're talking, you know, there's the champions. You're minus 10 to them. So that's what you're starting off with, aren't you?
Yeah.
You know, there. So
a Kildare team who Down beat in the Division 2 final convincingly last year.
And like, it's a precarious position. Like, they need to beat Carlow. They don't have a good record against Dublin at all. Like, and then they're into Newry on the last day. And like at the minute, like, you've seen a lot of Down. You've seen a lot of Down over the last few years, and it does. I wouldn't say it doesn't quite feel to me like there's a flip of the order. There's no sudden change of 1 and 2 in Ulster here, but certainly it feels like put it to this: the last day. If the last day was in Ballycran, it feels like Down would be sitting there. Here we go, lads. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's in Newry, I don't know, that to me just plays a bit on Antrim's hands.
What the decision making was there, how that came about, the decision to have it in Newry, and obviously it's like Ronan Shane's home club and stuff. You know what I mean? It'd be a brilliant occasion to bring Antrim to Newry for a big game like that, especially if survival's at stake. But yeah, I think with Down, you know, there's probably, touching on some of the themes that maybe we looked at even when we were talking about Armagh and McGeeney there earlier, because prior to 2019, Ronan Shane coming in and so forth, like they would have really struggled for numbers, struggled for any kind of continuity within the panel. Now, ever since then, you have the same cohort of guys coming, like, and it's backbone. They have backboned this team that has just gradually risen from 2B to then, you know, beating the likes of Westmeath away, you know, competing with the Laois, the Carlows, and then they're up here now, and it's a different. You know, you could look at yesterday. Obviously, like, that was a chasing afternoon in Cusack
But
Park.
you expect that,
but you know that's like, you know that whenever you're
brand new.
I think they scored 3-7 in the last 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, it's that can happen against this really top tier county, especially if you're a county like Down who are coming up into that. Their seasons was always going to be defined by Kildare and Antrim, and how the two games go against Kildare and Antrim. They've Kildare next, and as I said, they beat them in the Division 2 final last year. They have beaten them in the league, you know, so that'll hold no fear for them. But I think as well, looking at the bigger picture with Down, and I mentioned that they have a lot of, they've a really, really strong core. Like when you look at the Matthew Conlons, the Keelan Taggart, Mark Fisher, I'm going to run it, like the Sands brothers are, like there's a lot of guys who've been there for a long time, but actually of their 36-man panel, I think 15 of them are under 22 as well, so you've like
A lot of
Tom McGrattan's, Finn Turpin's in there, Ben Taggart, there's, it's not like there probably was this preconception with Down that they just had this really group and it was maybe, slowly but surely going to come to an end, and maybe it will, you know what I mean, but they've definitely put a lot of foundation blocks in place that might allow them to continue to play, if not maybe at 1B level, but around that, that's what that's what the goal always was to be around that level, where with Joe McDonough, Westmeath, like I think they're now going into their 6th or 7th year straight in Joe McDonough, which is an unbelievable achievement.
And that's the thing with Down, because what they've done in the league is remarkable. The performances and the results they've built up over year over year over year, and to get to this point. But it does feel like, and I suppose it's a sense of the raising the expectation as well. It feels like they need a summer. They've probably not had the summers to back up their springs in the last few years, and that's bound to disappoint them.
It does, and I suppose you're going to run into probably issues with clubs and so forth, I guess, and players maybe, demands of club players and injuries as well. Like, whenever you have a panel, albeit it's a strong panel, but they can't afford to lose guys. So if they do, like they lost Tom McGrattan on the first day of the Joe McDonough last year, you know what I mean? So all of a sudden, like, he's your free taker. He's the talisman in a lot of ways, or was getting that way with Down, like, and so to back up what they've done in the league, but I think they've always put an emphasis on the league for that reason, because the consistency of being there and exposing, like, the likes of those guys, the Poochies or Ben Taggart, if they're playing against that kind of standard of opposition year on year, like even going to Clare yesterday and playing Wexford in Ballycran last week, that can only stand to them. And I mean, you would hope, as you say, you would obviously hope that stands to them come summer, because they have the reality of hurling is, like, you can ship, they have shipped really heavy defeats occasionally to the Carlos, Leashes, but that's unfortunately just going to happen sometimes. The games can just get away from you. But I think the way that they have developed over the years, like, gives plenty of cause for optimism, and when it's painted against what the previous 10 years were like, you just look at it and go, well, it's night and day, like, because for I think 9 years they couldn't get out of Division 2B. They could hardly. I remember phoning Marty Mallon, who was the manager before Ronan Sheehan, like, and he'd just be pulling his hair out at, like, not being able to get hardly enough players at training, and so the whole culture of the thing has changed. Like, Ronan Sheehan deserves a lot of credit, I think, because, and like Owen Sands referred to him as the facilitator or whatever after they won that Division 2 last year. But what he does, which is what a lot of the really top guys do, is they bring in really brilliant coaches with him. Like, so he's always had, like, Dermot O'Sullivan, there's obviously a Cork connection there, and he's had him by his side for a lot of it. But even Trevor Fletcher, who's been there the last couple of years, if you talk to any of the Down players, they'll absolutely, eulogise about him, you know what I mean? So it's that, there's the environment and the culture that's there at the minute is, you'd hope that that'll be the legacy of what Down have done the last number of years.
Going to scalp Antrim now?
I wouldn't say that, but we'll see. It'd be an interesting one.